Luis Guzmán doesn't look like a typical Hollywood leading man, and that's exactly why he stands out. Born on August 28, 1956, in Calle, Puerto Rico, Luis was raised in the rough and tumble streets of New York City's Lower East Side, and later in the Bronx. His mother, Rosa, was a hospital worker, and his stepfather worked as a TV repairman. Their household was modest, but full of warm food and music. Salsa on the radio, neighbors yelling across fire escapes, and the aroma of arroz con gandules drifting through tenement hallways. This was the soundtrack of his youth. Growing up in a Latino household in New York wasn't just about language, it was about duality. Luis learned to code switch before he even knew the term. At school, he spoke English, navigated the system, made teachers laugh. At home, it was Spanish full volume, full heart. He learned early that identity wasn't about picking sides, it was about holding both worlds in your bones. Unlike many who dream of fame from a young age, Luis didn't see acting as a ticket out. In fact, he didn't see it at all, at least not at first. He was a class clown, yes, but his earliest ambitions were grounded in something quieter, helping people. He studied at City College of New York with the intention of becoming a social worker. And for a time, that's exactly what he did. He worked with troubled youth in the city, listening to their stories, trying to guide them through systems that often failed them. But Luis had something else, a face that could say 1,000 words and a presence that lit up every room even without trying. Friends pushed him to try theater. He joined a local troupe. And slowly, something clicked. The stage wasn't a spotlight for him. It was a mirror. In performance, he found a way to express the contradictions he lived with every day, the comedy and tragedy of being Latino, poor, proud, and invisible in America. He didn't play roles to escape himself. He played them to reveal something deeper about who he was. That kid from the Bronx whose accent didn't match TV anchors and whose name never showed up on billboards was beginning to understand there's power in simply showing up as yourself. And that's what he would do again and again for decades to come. Luis Guzmán never had a plan to become a movie star. There was no vision board, no headshots mailed to casting directors. He didn't chase fame, it came stumbling toward him. In the 1980s, while still working as a full-time social worker, Luis began dabbling in theater at night. A friend had dragged him to an open casting call for a small play in the city. He got the part not because he was classically trained, but because he was real. He didn't read lines, he lived them. His performances caught attention. First in tiny black box theaters, then in student films. Then somehow on the radar of casting directors who were looking for something authentic, someone who didn't feel manufactured by Hollywood. And that's exactly who Luis was. In 1983, he landed a small role in the film Variety. It wasn't glamorous. He played a street guy. No arc, no monologue, but the camera liked him. Or, more accurately, it believed him. That mattered. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, Luis kept showing up in unexpected places, music videos, indie flicks, short-lived TV shows. He was the kind of actor who made scenes feel more alive just by being in them. You might not remember his character's name, but you'd remember his face. Then came the breakthrough. In 1993, he appeared in Carlito's Way alongside Al Pacino. It was a major film. Big names, big studio. Luis had a small part Pachanga Carlito's loyal but foolish friend. But he made an impression. That mixture of charm, sadness, and streetwise humor became his signature. From there, the doors started opening. Not wide, but just enough. Enough for him to squeeze through with his unique walk, crooked smile, and a voice that sounded like it belonged to the city itself. Luis never stopped being a social worker in spirit. Even as he moved onto bigger sets, he remained grounded. He still took the subway. Still lived in New York. Still talked to kids on the block. Fame didn't change his roots. It just gave him a bigger microphone. He didn't look like a star. But he was beginning to shine on his own terms. By the late 1990s, Luis Guzmán had become something rare in Hollywood, a character actor who didn't just fill space in the background, but quietly anchored every scene he was in. He wasn't the type to walk in with star power blazing. Instead, he brought something better soul. Directors noticed, especially the ones who valued authenticity over glamour. That's why Paul Thomas Anderson and Steven Soderbergh became two of his biggest creative allies. In Boogie Nights, 1997, Luis played Maurice T.T. Rodriguez, a nightclub owner with loud shirts, louder opinions, and just the right amount of comic timing. He wasn't central to the plot, but the film would have felt emptier without him. His energy was the glue in chaotic moments, never stealing the scene, always elevating it. That same intangible magic followed him into Magnolia, 1999, and again in Traffic 2000, where he played DEA informant Ray Castro. Jittery, morally ambiguous, and constantly riding the line between comic relief and emotional tension, Luis made the character human. Not a trope, not a stereotype, a person. By this point, casting directors knew exactly what Luis brought: realism, unpredictability, and heart. His performances weren't polished in the traditional Hollywood sense. That's what made them powerful. You didn't see an actor playing a role, you saw someone being, and it was refreshing. Luis wasn't trying to prove he could be anyone. He proved that being himself was already enough, and in an industry obsessed with perfection and polish, that was revolutionary. Audiences responded in kind. They may not have always remembered his characters' names, but they remembered his face, his voice, and most of all, the feeling he left behind. Because no matter who he played, a thug, a cousin, a comic relief, there was always something disarmingly human about him. He reminded people of someone they knew. He felt familiar. And in a world full of Hollywood illusions, that made him invaluable. Luis Guzmán has always stood out, not just because of his look or his voice, but because of his refusal to play along with Hollywood's lazy version of Latino identity. In an industry where brown faces were often cast as drug dealers, gangsters, or comic relief, Luis said yes only to the roles that felt real. And more importantly, he wasn't afraid to say no. He never wanted to be a token. He wanted to be a person. Time and again, he turned down parts that felt like stereotypes. The greasy thug, the clueless janitor, the funny but dumb cousin. These characters didn't reflect the people he grew up with in the Bronx, the women who worked 3 jobs, the men who were proud, smart, and deeply rooted in their communities. Luis didn't see them on screen, and that bothered him. So he decided that as much as he could, he'd only accept roles that added something to the conversation. That integrity cost him some gigs, but it gained him something more valuable: respect. Over the years, he became an unintentional advocate for Latinx representation in film and TV, not because he gave speeches or led marches, but because of the roles he chose, the way he played them, and the interviews where he spoke with quiet fire about what needed to change. He reminded Hollywood that Latinos aren't a monolith. They're not background noise or comedic color. They are teachers, fathers, nurses, thinkers, lovers, and leaders. And they deserve stories that reflect that truth. And he led by example. In films like The Count of Monte Cristo, Welcome to Collinwood, or even more mainstream projects like Journey to the Mysterious Island, Luis brought depth to every role, no matter how big or small. He didn't scream representation, he embodied it. That perhaps is what makes his influence so lasting. He never claimed to speak for all Latinos. He simply insisted on being one who was fully seen. Luis Guzmán may not be a household name in the way that some actors are, but show almost anyone a picture of him and their eyes light up. "Oh yeah, that guy, I love him," they'll say. He's that kind of actor, instantly recognizable, instantly beloved, even if you don't know his name. And a big part of that comes from television. While film brought him acclaim, it was TV that brought him into people's living rooms and heart. From the gritty HBO prison drama Oz to the stylish crime world of Narcos, Luis proved again and again that he could fit into any universe. He wasn't just there. He made his presence felt. In Oz, he played Raul El Cid Hernandez, a ruthless but strangely principled gang leader. The show was violent, messy, and morally complex, and so was Luis's character. You couldn't look away from him. In Narcos, he brought nuance to a world often reduced to caricature. Once again, he gave his characters dimension, dignity, and danger. But what really cemented his status as a pop culture icon comedy? Luis has always had impeccable comedic timing. His gruff voice, expressive eyes, and deadpan delivery make him perfect for roles that walk the line between absurd and authentic. Whether he was playing a sleazy landlord in Shameless, a washed-up boxing coach in How to Make It in America, or parodying himself in Community, he always understood the assignment. He wasn't afraid to be ridiculous, but he never made fun of people like him. That's the difference. And then, of course, came the memes. Luis Guzmán became a TikTok favorite, a Reddit darling, and even a running gag in shows like BoJack Horseman, where he was animated into a fictionalized version of himself, complete with a community college named in his honor. Luis Guzmán Community College became a symbol of lovable oddness, and Luis leaned right into it. That was the magic. He never took himself too seriously. But the world took notice anyway. Without ever being a conventional star, Luis had become something bigger, a cultural fixture. Someone who could make you laugh, make you think, and make you feel like you'd known him forever, even if he was just on screen for 5 minutes. When Netflix announced its reimagining of the Addams Family in the Tim Burton-directed series Wednesday, fans were excited and a little nervous. Who could possibly live up to the iconic Gomez Addams, a role immortalized by Raul Julia in the 90s, and John Astin before that? Then came the surprise casting Luis Guzmán. The internet reacted fast. Some were thrilled to see a Latino actor finally portray Gomez as he was originally written in Charles Addams's comics, shorter, rounder, romantic eccentric. Others questioned the choice unfairly, comparing him to Raul Julia's suave, cinematic take. But Luis didn't flinch. He knew who Gomez was at his core, a devoted father, a passionate lover, a man who thrived in chaos, but loved with complete clarity. And that's exactly what he brought to the role. In Wednesday Season 1, Luis's Gomez was unlike any before him. He wasn't polished, he wasn't smooth. He was messy, wild-eyed, and totally in love with Morticia, with his children, and with the beautifully bizarre life they'd built. His version of Gomez wasn't trying to be anyone else. He was unapologetically, completely himself. That authenticity grew on people. Slowly, the audience came around. Critics praised Luis's chemistry with Catherine Zeta-Jones. Morticia and his ability to bring sincerity to a character often played for laughs. More importantly, younger viewers, many of them Latino, finally saw a version of Gomez that looked like someone in their own family. And now, with Wednesday Season 2 on the horizon, Gomez Addams is set to return with more screen time, more family drama, and more layers. Luis has hinted in interviews that the second season will dive deeper into the Addams family's past and Gomez's role as both protector and mischief maker. What makes Luis's Gomez so special isn't how he reinvents the character. It's how he restores him to his roots with love, loyalty, and a little madness. For all his fame, Luis Guzmán has never let Hollywood pull him away from who he really is. Long before the red carpets and award shows, he was a son of the Bronx, a proud Puerto Rican kid who knew how it felt to be overlooked. And that's exactly who he stayed. At home, Luis isn't a star. He's a father of 5, a husband, a man who grills in the backyard and still yells at the TV during Mets games. He's always spoken proudly about his children, especially about raising them to understand both where they come from and what they stand for. "I want them to be kind," he said. "Kindness is power." But Luis hasn't just raised his family. He's raised his community. Throughout his career, he's returned again and again to the Bronx, not just to visit, but to uplift. He's partnered with youth organizations, spoken at schools, and used his platform to shine a light on the very neighborhoods that raised him. He's never forgotten how it felt to be a kid who didn't see anyone like him on TV, and he's determined to change that for others. In Puerto Rico, he's done the same. After Hurricane Maria, he was one of the most vocal celebrity advocates for aid and attention. He used his voice not just on social media, but in real spaces, organizing fundraisers, volunteering, and visiting areas that were often ignored by the headlines. He doesn't do it for applause. In fact, he rarely even posts about it. For Luis, helping isn't a brand, it's a responsibility. That's why in 2021, when he was honored by Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr., the moment felt bigger than any Emmy or Oscar. The people who watched him grow up, the bodega owners, the school teachers, the neighbors stood and cheered, not for the actor on screen, but for the man he had always been off it. In a world that often confuses fame with value, Luis Guzmán is a reminder. Your worth isn't in how loud you shine. Sometimes it's in how quietly you show up for others. Luis Guzmán never looked like the kind of actor Hollywood puts on a pedestal. He wasn't sculpted like a leading man, didn't glide down red carpets in designer suits, and rarely spoke with the careful cadence of classical training. But maybe that's exactly why he endured. While others were shaped and polished to fit an industry mold, Luis simply stood still and waited for the world to catch up. He didn't force his way into the spotlight. He didn't compromise. He just kept showing up unapologetically himself, always a little scruffy, always a little odd, and always honest. That in the end became his greatest strength. Over the years, Luis became more than a character actor. He became a face people loved without needing to explain why. He brought a kind of warmth and realness that audiences craved. He didn't play the hero yet, somehow he always made you root for him. He didn't need 10 pages of dialogue to leave a mark, he just had to walk into a scene, look around, and be human. And because of that, he made space on screen for people who looked and sounded like him. People who had never seen themselves as anything more than background noise now saw themselves in the spotlight. His legacy isn't about the number of movies or the size of the roles. It's about the quiet revolution he led by never pretending to be anything but exactly who he was. As Gomez Addams in Wednesday, he carried that same spirit, unpolished, unpredictable, deeply loving, and uniquely his own. In a world that often rewards those who blend in, Luis Guzmán proved that sometimes the most unforgettable presence is the one that never tries to be perfect, just real.